The sound of silence was heavy that night, only broken by the soft ripple of water behind the dam. I stood there, my boots pressed into the cold concrete, watching the dark waves stretch out under the pale moonlight. My hands shook, not from fear, but from a storm of emotions I had held back for far too long: rage, betrayal, heartbreak, and the unshakable weight of injustice. For months, I had been ignored. For months, I had been pushed aside, treated like dirt on my own land. Now, as the dam's gate creaked under my grip, I realized the truth. Sometimes the only way to be heard is to let the world drown in the lies it tried to bury you under. My land was everything to me. It wasn't just acres of dirt and grass. It was my father's sweat, my mother's prayers, and my childhood wrapped into one. I could still remember the mornings waking up to the smell of fresh bread my mom baked, my father's calloused hands showing me how to work the soil, and the nights I fell asleep to the sound of crickets by the lake. This place wasn't property. It was blood. It was roots. And yet, the HOA, with their shiny cars, pressed suits, and fake smiles, came with contracts and court orders I never signed, building homes where my cattle once grazed. 35 houses, 35 families living on the stolen heartbeat of my family's history. It all began when Dad passed. Cancer took him fast, too fast. I was left with grief and paperwork I barely understood. I thought I had time to mourn, to gather myself, but vultures don't wait. They circled the moment his obituary went into the paper. A month later, the HOA president, a smug man named Greg Larson, came knocking. He wore his arrogance like a suit, his smile dripping with false sympathy. "You're young," he said. "You don't understand how land works. Let us help. We'll take care of it." I told him no. I told him this land was my father's legacy. But he only chuckled and walked away as if he already owned me. Weeks passed, then construction trucks rolled in. At first, I thought they were mistaken. But when I ran down there, waving my arms, screaming at the drivers, Greg showed up again, waving a stack of papers in my face. "We bought this land," he smirked. "It's all legal." I didn't sign anything. I never agreed. But he didn't care. Neither did the sheriff, who turned me away like some nuisance. My words carried no weight against their money. And just like that, bulldozers tore down fences my father built with his own hands. Concrete replaced soil. Children played where my mother's roses once bloomed. Every day, I watched a piece of my soul be buried under their polished driveways and freshly painted walls. I tried fighting. God knows I tried. Lawyers bled me dry with false hope. Each hearing ended with another slap across my face. Another, ruling in their favor. My bank account emptied, my spirit weakened. And my home in the farmhouse my father built stood like a lonely ghost beside the rising neighborhood. I watched from my porch as strangers laughed, barbecued, and celebrated on land they had no right to claim. Every laugh was a knife twisting deeper. Every passing car was a reminder that I had lost everything. But what they didn't know, what no one remembered but me, was the dam. My father built it decades ago to keep the ranch supplied with water. A private reservoir, hidden just enough by the hills, quiet and forgotten. But I never forgot. I maintained it, repaired the cracks, checked the gates. While the HOA pretended they owned the ground under their shoes, they didn't realize their 35 homes sat squarely in the path of water, held back by one gate: my hand, my choice. The night I decided was the night Greg pushed too far. He came up my driveway in his black SUV, stepping out like a king inspecting his land. "You're going to have to move," he said, tapping his watch. "We've given you enough time. The farmhouse has to go. Our buyers want clear views, not some crumbling shack." My fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my skin. "This is my land," I said, my voice breaking. "You can't take it all." He only smiled, that same arrogant smile, and whispered, "Watch me." When he left, I sat on the porch until the sky went black, my mind racing, my chest tight. Every word, every insult, every memory of my father's calloused hands guiding Minette all crashed inside me. They had taken enough. They had stolen enough. And maybe the law wouldn't listen. Maybe the sheriff didn't care. But water listens to no man. Water takes what it wants, and I had the key. So here I was, standing at the dam, under the moonlight. Tears burning in my eyes as I touched the cold steel wheel that controlled the gate. My father's voice echoed in my head. "Water is power, son. Respect it, but never forget, can build life and it can destroy." My chest rose and fell as the weight of that truth sank in. They thought they had buried me, but all they did was plant the seed of my wrath. As I stood there, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my younger sister, Emily, who had left after Dad died, unable to stomach the sight of what they were doing. "Are you okay? I can't sleep tonight. I keep dreaming of Dad's fields." I swallowed hard, staring at the message. For a moment, doubt crept in. Could I really do this? Flood 35 homes, families, children? But then I remembered the tears in Emily's eyes when she left, her voice breaking as she said, "They're killing everything Dad stood for." She was right. This wasn't just about revenge. This was justice. Justice no court would give me. I placed my hands on the wheel. My grip tightened, the steel biting into my skin. Oh, gosh. Storm of memories rushed through me, Dad's laughter, Mom's prayers, Emily's tears, Greg's smug grin. And in that storm, I felt something inside me snap, something I could never take back. The dam groaned as I turned the wheel, the water behind it roaring to be free, to reclaim what was stolen. And as the first surge spilled out into the dark valley below, I whispered to the night, "This is for you, Dad, for all of us." The roar of water was unlike anything I had ever heard before. It started as a low growl, deep and threatening, before rising into a deafening rush as the dam gates opened wider. The air vibrated with its force, a sound that was half thunder and half scream. My chest pounded in rhythm with it, my pulse quickening as I watched the water surge forward, cascading down the slope into the valley where 35 homes sat, snug and proud, each with their neat lawns and warm porch lights. For the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. It wasn't peace. Not yet, but it was the first breath of justice I had tasted since Dad's funeral. I stayed at the dam longer than I meant to, my eyes locked on the shadowy torrent rushing downhill. The moonlight painted the water silver, but in my mind, it was darker. It was the blood of betrayal, the tears of my family, the sweat of my father's labor, all rolled into one unstoppable force. When I finally turned back, my phone buzzed again. Emily had sent another message. "What are you doing tonight?" Something feels wrong. I didn't answer. I couldn't. She wouldn't understand, not yet. Maybe not ever. The drive back to the farmhouse felt surreal. Every mile between me and that dam carried a heavier silence, broken only by the fading roar of the flood in the distance. My headlights caught glimpses of what was coming, small streams cutting across dirt roads, water licking at fence posts. It was too soon to see the destruction, but I knew it was only a matter of time. By dawn, everything they built on my father's land would be nothing but mud and wreckage. Sleep was impossible that night. I sat by the window, staring at the faint glow of the neighborhood below. Their streetlights still twinkled against the darkness, unaware of the storm bearing down on them. My hands trembled, not from regret, but from the weight of knowing what I had unleashed. It wasn't just their houses at risk, it was their cars, their furniture, their lives. Some of those people were innocent, I told myself. Families who thought they were buying homes fair and square. But then I remembered the laughter, the barbecues, the way they waved at me like I was some strange relic, an obstacle in their picture-perfect community. No one had asked me. No one cared what it cost me. They had chosen to live on my pain, and now they would pay the price. The first screams woke me before the sun did. At first, I thought it was the dream of a guilty man, but then I heard the sirens. They echoed through the valley, sharp and panicked, bouncing off the hills. I rushed outside and saw flashing lights in the distance, weaving between the houses. The glow of street lamps flickered against a sheet of water that stretched across the lower fields, swallowing fences and creeping closer to the rows of homes. I stood there, barefoot in the dirt, the cool morning air biting against my skin. For a moment, I almost collapsed. My knees buckled, my stomach turned, and I pressed a hand against the porch railing to steady myself. The sight was terrifying yet intoxicating. The water moved like a beast, twisting, rolling, breaking through everything in its path. This was no longer just revenge. This was nature reclaiming what was stolen. Down in the valley, chaos erupted. I could see shadows running in the streets, headlights flashing as cars tried to escape. The sound of shouting carried faintly through the air, mixed with the blaring of car horns and the desperate barking of dogs. Greg's house stood out among them, bigger, flashier, with his precious white fence that he always bragged about. The water reached it first. I watched it split open the pristine barrier like it was nothing more than paper. His porch lights blinked twice, then went out. For the first time in months, I smiled. But the smile didn't last. My phone rang, and this time it wasn't Emily. It was the sheriff. His voice was sharp, clipped, panicked. "We've got flooding, real bad. Whole neighborhoods underwater. You up near the dam. Did you see anything?" His words twisted my insides. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. "No," I lied. "I haven't been up there in weeks." Maybe it cracked on its own. He muttered something under his breath, too much static to catch before hanging up. I dropped the phone, staring at it as if it had betrayed me. My chest heaved, my heart thundering. It was one thing to hate them. It's one thing to want them gone. But now, with the sheriff's words still echoing, the reality of what I'd done began to sink in. This wasn't just destruction of property. This was lives in danger. Emily showed up that morning. Her little red car skidded into the driveway, gravel spitting under the tires. She slammed the door, her face pale, eyes wide. "What the hell is happening?" she screamed. I drove past. The valley people are in the streets. Houses are flooding. "Don't tell me you had something to do with this." Her voice cracked, and for a second she was that little girl again, clutching my hand after Mom died, begging me not to cry because she couldn't handle it if I did. My throat closed. I couldn't lie, not to her. I turned my head away, unable to meet her gaze. She gasped, the truth spilling into her face without me saying a word. "Oh my God," she whispered, stepping back like I had struck her. "What did you do?" Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't wipe them away. "They took everything, Em. Everything. I begged, I fought, and no one listened. They laughed at me, called me crazy, stole Dad's land right out from under us. What else was I supposed to do?" Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her mouth. "Not this," she choked out. "Not like this. People live there. Kids, families. You're not just hurting Greg, you're hurting everyone." I wanted to argue, to remind her that those people moved in without a thought of what it cost us. But her words stabbed deeper than I expected. My chest felt heavy, like the water itself had settled inside me. I turned away, staring at the hills, where the flood raged unseen but relentless. "This isn't over," I whispered. "It's only begun." Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You sound just like him," she said softly. "Like Greg, cold, heartless. I don't even recognize you anymore." Her words cut deeper than any blade. And as she drove off, leaving a trail of dust behind her, I realized something chilling. She was right. I had crossed a line I could never uncross. Yet as I stood there, the faint sound of sirens still wailing in the valley below, I also knew one thing, with absolute certainty: there was no turning back now. The sun rose slowly that morning, painting the sky with streaks of gold and red, but the valley below looked nothing like dawn. It looked like ruin. From my porch, I could see the water glistening in the early light, spreading like a giant scar across the land. The neat rows of homes the HOA had built now sat in silence. Half-drowned, roofs shining wet, lawns reduced to muddy swamps. Cars floated crooked in the streets, fences leaned sideways, and the once-proud white sidewalks were buried under brown floodwater. I should have felt satisfied. After all, this was what I wanted, wasn't it? Justice for my father, revenge for everything they had stolen. But as I stood there, arms crossed tight against my chest, all I felt was emptiness. It was like the flood had drained something out of me too, something I couldn't get back. The sirens had faded by mid-morning, replaced by the dull hum of helicopters circling above and the distant roar of emergency trucks. From time to time, I could hear the faint shouts of people wading through the water, calling out names, searching for loved ones. Every shout, every echo of desperation dug into me like claws. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. They were strangers, intruders, thieves who had laughed while they paved over my father's land. But no matter how many times I told myself that, I couldn't block out the image of children clutching their parents, their toys sinking in the mud, their lives ripped apart overnight because of me. By noon, the sheriff's truck rolled up my driveway again. Dust swirled around his tires as he slammed the door shut and marched toward me. His face was hard, his eyes sharp. "You sure you don't know anything?" he asked, his voice low and heavy, the kind of voice that carried suspicion. Because the dam didn't just give out on its own. That thing was built solid. I held my breath, forcing my face into a mask of calm. "I told you before," I said evenly. "I haven't been up there in months. Maybe the rain weakened it." He squinted at me, his jaw tightening. Funny thing is, there wasn't much rain. For a moment, silence stretched between us. The air was thick, the only sound the creak of the sheriff's belt as he shifted his weight. Then he sighed, running a hand down his weathered face. "Look, people are hurting down there. Houses are destroyed, families are displaced. Greg Larson's raising hell, demanding we find out what happened. If I were you, I'd stay clear of the valley for a while. Folks are angry, and they're looking for someone to blame." I nodded stiffly, but inside, my chest burned. Of course, Greg was already spinning this, using his money and his influence to twist the story. He didn't care about the families who lost their belongings or the kids crying in the streets. He only cared about his empire, his reputation, his damn HOA kingdom. And part of me smiled at that, because finally, it was crumbling. That night, I couldn't sleep. Emily's words haunted me. "You're not just hurting Greg, you're hurting everyone." Her voice echoed through the dark like a ghost, and no matter how I tried, I couldn't shut it out. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the old family photo hanging on the wall. Dad standing tall with his arm around Mom. Me and Emily on either side, holding fishing poles, our faces lit with joy. That photo had survived everything: the sickness, the funerals, the lawsuits, the construction. But now, looking at it, I felt ashamed. Would Dad have approved of what I'd done? Or would he have looked at me the way Emily had, like I was a stranger? The days that followed were chaos. News vans swarmed the valley, their cameras capturing every ruined street, every heartbroken family. Reporters spoke in sharp, urgent tones. Unprecedented flood. Entire neighborhood destroyed. Questions about dam safety. I avoided the town, staying hidden on the ranch, but I couldn't avoid the images on TV. The sight of children, huddled in emergency shelters, their eyes wide and confused, made my stomach twist. But then I saw Greg, standing in front of the cameras. His suit immaculate, despite the mud splashing around him, his face contorted in fury. This was sabotage. He shouted, pointing a finger at the reporters. Some bitter old rancher who couldn't accept progress destroyed our community, and we will find him. We will make him pay. His words lit a fire inside me. A bitter old rancher, that's all I was to him. Nothing more than an obstacle to be bulldozed. My hands clenched into fists as I watched him paint himself as the victim, twisting the story until he came out looking like the hero. That man had stolen my land, mocked my grief, and spat on my father's legacy. Now he had the nerve to call himself the one wronged. I couldn't let that stand. The guilt I had felt, the shame Emily had poured into MIT, began to fade. I told myself the flood wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Greg thought he could scare me, intimidate me with threats and cameras, but he didn't understand what he was dealing with. He had taken everything from me, and I had nothing left to lose. That made me dangerous, so I started planning. Not just another act of destruction, no. This had to be precise, personal. If the flood was justice for the land, then what came next would be justice for me, for Emily, for Dad. Late one evening, I walked down into the valley. The water had begun to recede, leaving behind thick mud and ruined belongings scattered across the streets. Children's bicycles, half buried, couches stained and broken, photo albums torn apart. The silence was eerie, broken only by the occasional drip of water or the distant bark of a stray dog. I stood outside Greg's house, or what was left of it. The foundation had cracked, the walls bowed in, but the frame still stood stubbornly. Against the flood's wrath, it's a symbol of him refusing to break, even when everything around him had fallen. I stared at that house for a long time, my chest heaving with emotions I couldn't name. Anger, hatred, but also something darker. Something that whispered of vengeance, not yet finished. As I turned to leave, I noticed something half buried in the mud near his porch, a photo frame, its glass cracked. Inside was a picture of Greg, his wife, and two young boys, all smiling in front of their home. My stomach nodded. For the first time, I remembered that Greg wasn't just a villain in my story. He had a family too, innocent ones. I picked up the frame, my hands trembling before shoving it back into the mud. Not them, I muttered to myself. Just him. The plan was forming in my head now, clearer with every step back toward the ranch. The flood had taken his neighborhood, but it hadn't taken him. And until Greg Larson himself paid the price for what he'd done to us, I knew my work wasn't finished. Nights felt colder after the flood, like the land itself carried a permanent chill. The valley was no longer a bustling neighborhood. It was a ghost town. The streets were thick with mud. The smell of mold and sewage clung to the air, and silence ruled where laughter once rang. But silence has a way of speaking if you listen close enough. And what it whispered to me was simple. This wasn't over. Greg Larson might have lost his shiny development, but he hadn't lost his voice. Every day I watched him on the news, standing before cameras with that same smug expression he had worn when he first shoved papers in my face. This flood wasn't an accident, he barked, jabbing a finger at the lens. This was sabotage. And when I find out who did it, they'll wish they never crossed me. His words spread like wildfire, fueling anger in those who had lost their homes. They weren't pointing fingers at him, the man who stole their land to begin with. They were pointing at me. The outcast, the stubborn rancher living on the hill. Above the wreckage, it didn't take long before the threats started. Anonymous letters left in my mailbox. Rocks thrown at my fence in the middle of the night. Strangers slowing their cars on the road just long enough to glare before speeding off. Emily called me in tears one evening, her voice trembling as she said, "They think you did it, and Greg's stirring them up. I don't even feel safe coming to see you anymore." Her words stung, but they also hardened me. Greg had turned everyone against me, just like he always did, twisting the story, painting himself as the victim. But if they wanted to see me as the villain, then maybe it was time I became one. I began to follow him, not openly, but from a distance in ways I knew he wouldn't notice. He had moved his family temporarily into a rental on the far side of town, one of those soulless houses that looked like it had been copied and pasted 100 times. I'd park my truck a block away and watch the lights through binoculars, noting when he left, when he came home, when the kids played outside. The longer I watched, the clearer it became. Greg lived for power. He wasn't worried about his family. Not really. He was worried about rebuilding his empire, about climbing back on top after the flood knocked him down. One night, I followed him to a meeting at the courthouse. Through the crack of an open window, I heard him promising investors that the neighborhood would be rebuilt, bigger and better than before. "This time," he bragged, "we'll secure the land properly. That stubborn rancher won't be a problem for much longer." The room erupted in applause. My blood boiled. He hadn't learned a damn thing. 35 homes destroyed, families displaced, lives uprooted, and he was already planning to do it all again. On my land. That was the night I decided. The flood had been a warning, but now it was time for something sharper. Something that would cut him personally, where it hurt the most. I spent the next few days digging through old boxes in the farmhouse. Dad had kept everything: receipts, deeds, contracts, going back decades. And in one of those boxes, yellowed and brittle with age, I found what I needed: the original survey maps of the land. They showed the boundaries as they truly were, not as Greg and his HOA lawyers had redrawn them. The houses they built weren't just on stolen ground. They sat directly on land marked as protected wetlands, land the county had forbidden from being developed. My hands shook as I held those papers, a new kind of fire igniting inside me. Greg thought he could destroy me in court. I would destroy him with the truth. I drove to Emily's place the next morning, a box of documents riding shotgun beside me. She looked surprised when she opened the door, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "What are you doing here?" she asked cautiously. I set the box on her kitchen table and pulled out the maps, spreading them open. "Look," I said, my voice low but urgent. "This isn't just about Dad's land anymore." Greg broke the law. He built on protected ground. If I take this to the county, they'll have no choice but to shut him down for good. Emily leaned over the maps, her brow furrowed. For the first time in weeks, I saw something soften in her eyes. Hope, but it was quickly drowned by fear. "If you take this public, Greg will know it came from you. He'll come after you harder than ever." "Let him," I said, my voice steady. "He already ruined me. He already made me the villain. But this time, I'll drag him down with me." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You don't understand, do you? You're not just fighting Greg, you're fighting everyone who believes in him. And they're blind enough to follow him off a cliff. He won't just ruin you, he'll destroy you." I reached across the table, gripping her hand. "Then let him try. I'm not scared anymore." Her eyes searched mine for a long moment before she whispered, "Dad would have wanted justice, but he would have wanted you to survive too. Don't lose yourself in this, please." That night, I filed the complaint. I drove into town, walked into the county records office, and laid those maps on the clerk's desk. The woman's eyes widened as she scanned them, her pen pausing mid-scratch. "If this is accurate," she murmured, "the HOA has a serious problem on its hands." Those words echoed in my head all the way home. For the first time since the flood, I slept soundly. But peace never lasts long when Greg Larson is involved. 2 mornings later, I woke to the sound of tires crunching in my driveway. I peered out the window and saw Greg, stepping out of his black SUV, rage practically steaming off him. He didn't knock. He didn't call. He stormed straight up to the porch, his fists clenched. "You think you're clever?" he spat. His face twisted in fury. "You think I don't know it was you who filed that complaint? You're finished. Do you hear me? Finished." I stared at him through the screen door, my heart pounding but my voice calm. "You can't build on stolen land forever, Greg. It always comes back to bite you." His eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You're going to regret this, you and your whole damn family." And as he turned and stormed back to his car, gravel spraying under his tires, I realized something chilling. Greg wasn't just angry. He was desperate. And desperate men are the most dangerous of all. The days after Greg's visit were a storm I couldn't escape. He had left his words hanging in the air like poison, "You and your whole damn family." I couldn't shake the way he said it, the venom in his voice, the way his eyes burned like he was ready to do more than just fight in court. For the first time, I wondered if I had pushed him too far, if his desperation might drive him to something even darker than what I had done. Emily called me that evening, her voice trembling. "I don't feel safe," she whispered. "There was a car parked outside my place last night. No plates, tinted windows. It just sat there until sunrise." My stomach dropped. "It was him," I muttered, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "You don't know that," she said, trying to sound steady, but I could hear the fear breaking through. "But please, whatever you're doing, stop. I don't care about the land anymore. I don't care about Greg. I just want you safe. I want us safe." Her words cut me in two. Half of me wanted to listen, to take her hand, to walk away from all of this and leave Greg to drown in his own lies. But the other half, the half forged in the fire of betrayal and loss, knew that walking away meant surrender. And if I surrendered, everything Dad fought for, everything Mom prayed over, everything I had already sacrificed would die with me. The next morning, the county made their move. Inspectors rolled into the valley with clipboards and cameras, measuring the land, taking photos, pulling records. And just as I knew they would, they confirmed Greg's HOA had built directly over protected wetlands. News broke fast. Local papers ran headlines calling it the scandal of the century. Overnight, Greg went from victim to villain, from respected developer to criminal on the brink of ruin. I thought I'd feel triumph. Instead, all I felt was dread, because I knew Greg wouldn't go down quietly. That night, it came to a head. I was sitting on the porch, the old rocking chair creaking under me, when I saw headlights coming up the dirt road. Not just one car, 3. My chest tightened. Dust swirled as they pulled up, engines rumbling. Doors slammed, and then I saw Greg flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize. They were big, broad-shouldered, the kind of men who didn't come to talk. Greg stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "You think you won, huh?" he sneered, his voice carrying across the night air. "You think you can ruin me with some old papers? I built that neighborhood. I built this community. And you," he jabbed a finger at me, spittle flying from his mouth, "you destroyed it." I stood slowly, my fists clenched. "It was never yours to build on, Greg. You stole it. And now everyone knows." His face darkened. He glanced at the men beside him, then back at me. You should have stayed quiet. But now, I'm going to make an example of you. The men started forward, their boots crunching on gravel. My pulse thundered in my ears. For a moment, I thought this was it, that they were going to beat me down, maybe worse. But then I remembered something Dad had always said. A man who knows his land is never unarmed. I stepped back into the house, my heart pounding, and reached for the old shotgun that hung above the fireplace. It had been Dad's, a relic of a time when a man defended what was his with his own hands. I loaded it, my fingers trembling, and stepped back onto the porch. The men froze. Greg's eyes widened, then narrowed. "You wouldn't," he hissed. My voice was steady, though my insides felt like fire. "Try me." For a long moment, the world held its breath. The cicadas stopped humming. The wind stilled. Even the rocking chair seemed to go silent. Then, slowly, Greg raised his hands and backed away. "This isn't over," he spat, his face twisted in fury. "You'll regret this. I swear it." They got back in their cars, engines growling as they tore back down the road, dust trailing behind them. I stood there for a long time, shotgun heavy in my hands, my chest heaving. The night air was cool, but sweat poured down my back. When I finally lowered the gun, my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "I'm scared. Please come stay with me tonight." I stared at the screen, torn. Part of me wanted to go, to hold her, to promise her it would all be okay. But another part knew the truth. If Greg was willing to show up at my door with muscle, he wouldn't stop there. If I went to her, I'd be putting her directly in his crosshairs. So I didn't reply. Instead, I sat there until dawn, shotgun across my lap, watching the horizon bleed red as the sun rose. The next day, I heard the news. The county was pressing charges. Greg was being investigated for fraud, for illegal development, for every dirty trick he had ever pulled. His empire was crumbling. But even as I listened to the radio announcer detail his fall, I couldn't shake the image of his face, the way his eyes burned with hatred when he said, "You'll regret this." He wasn't done, not by a long shot. And deep down, I knew, before this war ended, one of us wasn't walking away. The night after the meeting, I couldn't sleep. My heart raced with both anger and fear. The HOA thought they had me cornered, but they didn't understand the land like I did. They didn't understand that every brick they laid, every driveway they poured, was built on stolen soil that carried my family's blood, sweat, and history. And when you rob a man of his legacy, you leave him with nothing to lose. I watched the moonlight spill across the reservoir from my bedroom window, the water glinting like a mirror. My father's voice echoed in my mind. "The dam doesn't just hold water, son. It holds time, it holds power. Don't forget that." The HOA kept pushing. Letters piled in my mailbox, all signed with smug little notes. Failure to cooperate will result in legal seizure. They dared to lecture me about seizure. They had already seized everything I had, but they didn't know my cards. They didn't know I had the original water rights contract sealed, notarized, signed by the county decades ago, that gave me exclusive control of the dam and the reservoir. Without my permission, every pipe, every irrigation system, and every house downstream was sitting on borrowed safety. As the weeks passed, I started to notice cracks, not in my dam, but in the HOA's perfect facade. One neighbor, a young mother named Clara, came to me quietly one evening. She said she regretted buying her home, that she hadn't known the land had belonged to me. She confessed the HOA promised her and her husband security, amenities, and safe investment. Instead, they were bled dry by monthly dues. "We didn't know," she whispered with tears in her eyes. "We didn't know they stole it from you." Her words pierced me. I didn't hate the families. I hated the machine that preyed on them, the smug board members who thought money could erase heritage. Still, the HOA kept testing my patience. They fenced off part of my remaining acres, claiming community use. They tried to fine me for improper dam upkeep, even though the structure predated their existence. Each notice was more arrogant than the last. They thought intimidation worked on everyone. They thought I'd fold like the others. They didn't realize I was the wrong man to corner. The breaking point came on a Sunday morning. I walked down to check the spillway, and I found fresh tire tracks leading to the gated service road. Someone had been up there without permission. When I inspected closer, I saw the padlock had been cut clean through. The gate left ajar. My stomach churned. The HOA had sent someone, maybe a contractor, maybe their own board, to tamper with my dam. They had no idea the risk, no idea the delicate balance of that water mass. But I did. And in that moment, I realized they weren't just stealing from me anymore. They were threatening the safety of everyone downstream, including the very families they pretended to protect. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the old keys. The dam's release valve, massive and rusted, hadn't been touched in years, but it worked. And if I wanted to, I could let it all go the reservoir. The lifeblood of the valley, the thing holding every one of their homes together. My hand trembled as I held the key. Part of me knew unleashing it would ruin them, drown their lies, wash away their empire of arrogance. Another part of me thought about Clara, her children playing in one of those houses. I wasn't a monster. I wasn't like the HOA, but justice had to come. I began planning, not recklessly. Not out of blind rage, but with precision. If I opened the dam in full, it would be disaster. But if I released just enough, I could flood the lower fields, ruin their utilities, cripple their infrastructure, and remind them who controlled the lifeline of their community. They wanted to play God with my land. Fine. I would remind them that God, or at least fate, had given me the final say. When the day came, it was quiet. I woke before dawn, packed a thermos of coffee, and hiked the service road with the keys clinking. In my pocket, the sky was streaked pink and orange, the air cool with morning mist. My boots echoed against the concrete as I approached the old valve chamber. The steel wheel loomed in front of me, cold and unyielding. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at it, hearing my pulse in my ears. My father's words returned. It holds power. My mother's face flashed in my mind, the way she used to smile when she looked over the reservoir. They were gone, but their memory lived in the water. I set down the thermos, took a deep breath, and gripped the wheel. The metal groaned as I forced it to turn, resisting at first, then loosening. My arms burned, my chest ached, but finally I felt the shift. A low rumble echoed through the dam, followed by the thunderous roar of water surging through the sluices. It started slow, a steady rush, then grew louder, fiercer as the floodgates opened. The valley trembled. I climbed up to the ridge to watch. The fields below, once pristine with their manicured HOA fences and playgrounds, began to drown. Water crept into basements, swamped freshly laid roads, and turned their sidewalks into rivers. I could already imagine the panic in their boardroom when the first phone calls came in, when they realized the one thing they couldn't control was the very ground and water beneath them. But as I watched the flood spread, I didn't feel joy. Not yet. What I felt was clarity. They had taken my land, but they hadn't taken my power. The war wasn't over. This was only the first strike. The rain had slowed to a mist, but the world around me felt like it had already drowned in silence. I stood at the dam, boots muddy, heart heavy, watching the aftermath of what I had unleashed. The water had torn through the land like an angry god, swallowing homes, fences, and the pride of those who thought they could own me. My land, scarred and soaked, stood free again. Yet freedom never came without a price. The sheriff's voice echoed in my head, his warning about consequences still fresh. But as I walked back toward what was left of my farmhouse, I couldn't help but feel something deeper, relief mixed with grief. My father's dream, my family's heritage, wasn't trampled anymore. Those homes, those HOA meetings, those smug voices trying to erase my name, they were gone. What remained was me, blood still hot, heart still aching, but finally standing where I belonged. Neighbors who had watched from afar now came closer. Some shook their heads, others whispered, behind their hands. A few nodded, as if they understood the years of torment I had endured. One older farmer, his face lined with time, walked right up to me. He laid a hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "Sometimes justice is loud, son. Sometimes it's a flood." His words sank deeper than any legal victory ever could. But there was no denying it. Lawsuits were coming. News reporters had already swarmed, their vans parked along the county road. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust into my face, asking, "Was this intentional? Do you regret it?" I met their stares with a calm fire and replied, "They stole my land. I took it back." No script, no apologies. Just truth. The HOA president, Karen herself, was among the few who hadn't been washed away. I saw her the next morning, standing in the mud where her luxury home once gleamed. Her hair was ruined, her manicured nails broken, her voice cracking as she screamed at me, "You destroyed everything. You're a monster." I didn't yell back. I didn't need to. I simply looked at her the way my father used to look at storms rolling in and said, "You destroyed yourself the day you trespassed on my land." She broke down in tears, not out of sorrow, but rage because she had lost. The courts did their part in the weeks that followed. Her lawyers pushed hard, but truth was heavier than water. The old surveys, my father's deed, and the county records told the story clearly. That land was mine. The HOA had knowingly ignored boundaries, bribed inspectors, and manipulated papers. When it all came to light, their empire collapsed faster than the homes had under the rushing flood. Families who had bought homes cried foul, blaming Karen and her board for lying to them. Some came to me, begging for forgiveness, others cursing. My name? I told them the same thing. I didn't take your homes. They built them on stolen soil. That's on them, not me. And as bitter as it sounded, it was the truth. Slowly, I rebuilt. Not the houses, not the roads, not the false kingdom the HOA had tried to plant. I rebuilt the farm. The fences went up again, not to keep people out, but to keep the land whole. I replanted trees where the water had carved through. I restored the barn plank by plank. And each evening, as the sun sank over the horizon, I felt my father's presence stronger than ever, like he was sitting on the porch beside me, nodding at the land we had saved. Months later, standing by the dam again, I realized I hadn't just flooded homes. I had washed away years of oppression, lies, and greed. The HOA no longer existed. Karen had lost everything: her wealth, her reputation, her voice. The land was quiet again, the way it was meant to be. And maybe that was the greatest revenge of all, not the destruction, not the chaos, but the silence that followed the silence of a man who had finally claimed what was his, and the silence of those who had no choice but to live with what they had done. As I looked across the open fields, wind brushing through the tall grass, I whispered one last promise: this land will never bow again.